We're called Neons, sinners plucked from hell to do God's dirty work. But I'm finding it hard to believe we're in heaven.
Heaven is a trip.
First of all, Neon White Fox. At first glance at the trailer, it looked like just a random gotta go fast indie to me, but it had Machine Girl for the soundtrack, and you can't go wrong with Machine Girl. The game got my attention. I tried the demo, it got me hooked, so here we are. My reviews don't usually have a concrete structure other than to just go along with the stream of my consciousness, but for this one, I will utilize a sequence that I could call the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'll start with the good, because there's so much more of it than the other two. It easily outweighs them, and my criticisms are closer to nitpicks anyway, but I'll have to mention them. Anyway, Neon White is a very gamey game that does the game part of the game the best. It's a bit tricky to describe the gameplay since it's fairly unique. It presents itself as a platformer shooter, but it's pretty much a parkour speedrun FPS puzzler. The player gets short levels, in which you need to kill all the demons and make it past all the obstacles to the finish point as fast as possible. The way it's done though, is not that usual. The weapons the player gets are not only meant for killing. Actually, most of the time they're useful for their secondary functions. The weapons aren't even presented as weapons on the screen, but as color-coded cards that, upon discarding with the right click, initiate some special move, like double jump, dash, or ground slam. Discarding the cards obviously makes the player not have the weapon anymore, but it's essential to get around, and constant quick choices have to be made about how is it the most efficient to use these cards. Hearing that it's sort of a speedrunny platformer with an attitude, I thought it could be something akin to Jet Set Radio, especially since Machine Girl has been inspired by those games quite a bit. But it's quite different in reality. With its level structure, it almost reminds me of something like Hotline Miami. All of the levels are very short and fast. You can expect to fail a lot, but restarting is instantaneous. You're never out of the action, and I love that kind of thing. I'm usually not a fan of difficult and punishing games. I'm easily frustrated. I cannot play Souls-likes for crap. To me, dying constantly and then having to wait through loading screens and then having all the mobs respawn and being set back significantly is not fun. Hotline Miami games were something I could enjoy despite their difficulty though, because dying in those games wouldn't be as big of a deal. I could always start over without any delays with one press of a button. The levels would be short and fast, but not much progress would be lost upon death. Well, only some levels in Hotline Miami 2 aside, that is. It's the same with Neon White. I would say it's even easier in that regard, because the levels themselves are actually not that hard. Failing can only set you back around 2 minutes at most, and that's if you fail at the very end of a long level. The difficulty comes from trying to get faster times, which isn't mandatory, but it is actually quite satisfying to go for. A good description I've seen for Neon White is that it's a gateway drug to speedrunning. I'm not into speedrunning at all, but once I got into the flow of Neon White's movement, I kept wanting more. Something like Jet Set Radio still felt quite clunky even though movement was the main part of the game. Meanwhile, Neon White runs as smooth as down my throat. I never had any framerate hiccups either, which is important for this kind of game. If I saw that my time was close to the next possible medal, I would want to push for it, shaving milliseconds off my previous record. It would always be interesting to search for ways I could skip parts of the levels by using the cards in less than obvious ways, or simply looking for shortcuts. Different chapters of the game would gradually introduce new cards and new types of demons, not only adding more challenge, but also more ways to traverse the levels.
You can't keep getting away with it!
Now, I want to introduce the cast of the game. I think going over what's been shown in the demo won't warrant for spoilers just yet. The game takes place in heaven, where dead sinners compete to become the #1 demon killer in order to enjoy some heavenly lives for a year or so. The protagonist of the game is, surprise surprise, an amnesiac. Hey yo, Mr. White! What is it, Jesse? You're in a video game, yo! The rest of the main cast consists of a loyal dumbass Yellow, a messed up curvy girl of questionable age Violet, and Red, a dumb lady. Dumb lady? They all knew White before death, and it's sort of the story of the game uncovering what their connections were, what went wrong, and how to make best of it after death. The antagonist is this sexy muscle mountain Green. Wait, that's pretty much Peter Steele. There's also this funny thing about the angels being seen differently by everyone, representing what they think an angel is, and White sees them as cats. First of all, relatable as heck. Second, does this count as a cat game review now? Surprisingly, I liked the characters quite a bit regardless of the corner writing, because the voice acting was very well done by a pretty great cast. I also found most of the characters relatable in some odd ways, as if they were caricatures of people I actually know. Moments like White speaking about Norwegian black metal would hit close to home. I wanted to introduce the characters, because some of these side objectives are tied to them. You see, heaven is still incredibly materialistic, so you have to find gifts in order to bribe your friends in order to get dialogues and memories from them. There's one gift to be found per level once it's beaten, and finding those gift boxes make the player think outside the box. The gifts are fairly simple things like cigars, 6 packs of beer, or goddamn Furbies. At first it may seem like these optional collectible gifts are just an obligatory modern game gimmick, but it's actually so much better. It's a very nice old school gaming practice that rewards the player with more content for their efforts. New levels with unique themes and gimmicks. They're honestly some of the more interesting levels in the whole game, and they could have easily been DLC in some other game. Is that a fingering statue? And of course, since I'm listing the things I liked, Machine Girl's input is obligatory to delve deeper into. It was the main selling point for me, and I imagine for many others as well. For those uninitiated, Machine Girl is a digital hardcore music act with a strong cult following, making abrasive, kinda weird, kinda spectacular music. Lately, they've been delving into a harsher punk sound with the Ugly Art and Hugo Void synthesizer albums, but Neon White's soundtrack was promised to be a bit softer, not much unlike their older, more electronic works such as the Gemini album. While that's all cool, I was actually pleasantly surprised by hearing some familiar tunes I recognize from Mark 90 Mix and even A2B2 Night of Fire set.
Machine Girl.
Yeah, I'm going full music nerd here. Even if Neon White's soundtrack is a bit softer than the Machine Girl's recent output, it works very well as a soundtrack, and there's so much of it, it warrants for a double album. On top of that, I like that by default, it's mixed at the loudest possible point in the game before the dialogues become inaudible. That's how I like my mixes when the OST is fire. To be completely frank, regardless of the soundtrack normally falling to the background of the game, I think it actually builds up to 50% of the game's enjoyability, with the other half being the gameplay. It just invigorates the game into something a lot more hardcore than it would be without it. If not for Machine Girl's post-rave maximalism, Neon White would have a significantly different tone. For the worse most likely. So yeah, the soundtrack fucks 169%. I want to point out, damn that's a long pointing finger, that the visual presentation didn't feel as fresh to me. Actually, I felt like I saw a lot of it in Paradise Killer before. The whole crumbling, vaporwave Paradise environment, minimalist white architecture, the semi-anime visual novel style dialogues, even the gameplay element of parkouring in order to catch collectibles. I can easily excuse the minimal looking environments, because the game's breakneck speed would make it hard to tell things apart in something more cluttered. The architecture in the game is more functional than pretty. Speaking of functional architecture, I feel like a level editor would do the game wonders. The visual novel stuff though, that's a bit more questionable. They give the necessary breaks in between the intense action, but as I said, they're presented in 2D VN style, which is a little odd. Not necessarily bad, but it's not much of a selling point either. Some people get put off by the thought that it looks like anime. I was a bit too at first. But I'd actually defend it by saying this isn't anime style, it's just your regular cartoony graphics. It feels like people just get too used to Western animation looking ugly like Rugrats or whatever. It was a bit odd choice still, because the characters wouldn't have varied poses, expressions would be covered by masks that would just have those anime style symbols overlaid to display anger or blushing or whatever, yet all of the main cast are fully modeled in 3D. Which would easily allow for more poses. Sure, the illustrations are stylish, and I tend to be a big advocate of 2D animation, but the short 3D cutscenes present in the game look great. Even the little 2D illustrations, sparsely using dialogues, look damn good. So, some of the dialogue visuals feel a bit lazy. I mean, even I have several different poses.
Yeah.
As you can tell, I'm starting to get into the bad side of things. But to get into it properly, I'll need to delve into the spoiler section, so if you're avoiding those, skip to this timestamp. So, the weakest link of Neon White is the writing. For the most part I didn't mind it too much, but it always felt juvenile in a cringy way. Cringe is dead, I know, but it is what it is. And even if I defended the game about not being anime, it's still incredibly horny.
Jesus, do I really look that sleazy to you?
Yes, but the good kind. The kind that will catch a girl's spit with his mouth.
Okay... There would even be a beach episode and everything. Anyway, the point of the game is that the Neons are dead sinners who have the skills to kill, so they've been summoned by the Believers to do their dirty work, slay demons. The one Neon to become the best of all will get to stay in heaven for a year until the next annual Judgment Day. Currently, this nasty dude Green is number 1, and he is so because he's willing to shove sticks into other Neon's wheels. That aside, people that White deals with the most are his former and I guess current friends, Yellow, Violet and Red. At first dialogues with them just feel corny all the way. I feel like I'm among the target age group for this sort of thing, but it often felt weak to me. I must admit that the characters grew on me with time as I got to know them better, but they still felt mostly one note. All of them. They would often throw around pop culture references around.
You're my Sasuke, man. The darkness to my light.
And while these weren't the worst ones I've seen, not all of them would be tasteful. Like the John China Cena one, for example.
Exit! Everybody out!
One way the player can get to know these characters better is just by progressing the plot. But giving them gifts also unlocks optional dialogues, most of which are just silly stuff. But eventually memories of life before death get unlocked, and the backstory of the game uncovered. In short, White, Yellow, Violet and Red were assassins working under Green. White was Green's favorite, and a leader for the other guys. Green was a butt munch though, never caring for his subordinates for real, and never admitting his wrongs. He planned this big heist against Blue, his former partner, that had wronged him. It was supposed to be one last heist that would provide all the dudes enough cash to retire for good, but all it did was retire all of them to the afterlife. Because instead of calculating things rationally, Green went for an unreasonable personal vendetta, risking other people's lives. After finding that out, White felt guilty about convincing the other guys to join the heist and wanted revenge against Green to make his wrongs right. Meanwhile, Green is being a complete maniac in the afterlife too, planning to steal the gods' tools and pretty much destroy heaven, because in his mind its existence is meaningless. I wouldn't mind this kind of plot, it's simple but serviceable. The dialogue is not always the best, but its vocal delivery is always top notch. The game is not great at providing satisfying finishes though. There is this thing with Heavenly Delight tickets. After each day, the player gets one Heavenly Delight. All of them suck. But the last one is some cool sword, and the player would get hyped up that it could be some powerful game changer, but instead it ends up being yet another gag. No actual value. The ending of the main plot feels similar. The story is tolerable the whole way through, and it's interesting to see what happens next, even if it is often predictable. But the very ending is damn unsatisfying. After defeating Green, White gets to ride him into God's Book of Death, killing Green for good. That by itself is satisfying, but that's the bad ending because White also dies, and that's it. No conclusions. Also, God revives Yellow, Wild and Red, since they were able to forgive White for their deaths. But not White, the one person who was actually trying to atone for his sins and did all the work saving heaven. The good ending is available if the player collects all of the gifts. Then White gets to ride Green into the Book of Life, forgiving him and being revived along with his friends by the god. Forgiveness and atoning for one's sins are big themes in the game, and I don't mind them whatsoever, but the way the ending was handled is just not good. Green just had zero redeeming qualities for his character, so having to forgive the maniac who kept being the big bad guy over and over again with no remorse felt almost insulting. But that's the intended way, because God said so. F you. I understand that there's a theme of breaking the cycle of hate. Green was consumed by his lust for revenge and disregarded everything and everyone else. But White wasn't like Green. He did want revenge for Green destroying his life and getting his friends killed, unreasonably so, but he never was consumed by hate. He never disregarded anyone else for the sake of killing Green. Maybe it could be cooler if collecting all the gifts and maxing out relationships would strengthen everyone's bonds, and people other than White would help convince Green that he was wrong and that he needs to repent or something. I know it's corny too, but at least there would be a reason to give the fucker a second chance instead of stopping him for good. To sum things up for spoiler skippers, the weakest part of the game is the writing, and not necessarily because a lot of it is juvenile and corny, since some dialogue still managed to be fun, but because the game fails handling some of its core ideas well. Now, onto the ugly. To make things clear, ugly is different from bad because it's not necessarily bad, but it cheapens the experience a bit for me. Remember how I really liked the unlockable levels? Well, there is a whole new game mode that can be unlocked as well, and I thought it would be something cool, like maybe some extra hard levels or whatever. It was actually the same recycled levels from the main game, but they would all have to be beaten in one go. These level rushes would also have a hell mode, that would make the player have to go through all of these levels with a single life, no retries. It wouldn't be that bad for yellows, reds and violets rushes, since there aren't too many levels in them. It would just feel like a decent challenge. White's and Mikey's level rushes consist of almost 100 levels though, recycling the whole main game. Going through all of that alone takes a decent amount of time, and only having one life for all of it frankly feels quite insane. The only rewards for it are bragging rights and Steam achievements. I thought I would 100% the achievements since I had already collected all of the gifts, and getting the ace medals in all levels didn't sound too bad. It was actually quite fun, but I got quickly discouraged upon seeing the level rushes. Again, it's completely optional stuff, unrelated to the main game, and it's not inherently bad. It doesn't hurt the main game experience. It could be fun to the most hardcore players, but looking at the Steam achievement stats, there aren't many of those. To me it just feels like tough challenges without any worthy payoff to them. On the bright side, at least there isn't any crucial plot stuff locked behind something as patience and time consuming. My complaints aside, I absolutely loved Neon White. So far it might even be my game of the year, but there might be strong competition later on, since Scorn and some other cool stuff is coming out. The gameplay itself was incredibly satisfying. It was some of the most fluid first-person movement I've experienced. It would draw me into the game so much, I wouldn't even notice some of the odd UI choices, like always displaying White's portrait at the bottom of the screen for no apparent reason. Even the boss fights, which tend to be clunky in more platformer-focused games, felt really fun. I enjoyed the more gimmicky levels even more, if anything. The writing might have been all horny and quite juvenile, but at the same time it was in perfect synthesis with the game's other aspects, the hardcore soundtrack and the frantic pace of the gameplay. It created this one concentrated chaotic energy, and that's chaotic in a good way, not in the game being a janky mess way whatsoever. Are you looking for something with stylish punk energy? Want a unique game? Maybe something that would scratch some of that Hotline Miami, Jet Set Radio, or even Paradise Killer itch? If you answered yes to any of those, I can strongly recommend playing Neon White for yourself. Even if you haven't, I might still recommend this game, because it's a rare case when something this nice with so little jank, pretty much none actually, lands in this channel. I guess I'll go try beat some of my times again now. Thank you for watching, and see you in another video.